The gunshot echoed across the valley, sending a flock of startled birds into the pale Montana sky as Grace Winters crouched behind a weathered oak, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. The year was 1875, and she had precisely 3 hours until she was to be married to Silas Blackburn, the most feared man in Riversbend, Montana, a man whose hands had more blood on them than the town butcher's apron. Grace clutched the small leather satchel containing her few possessions, a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, a change of clothes, and the meager savings she'd managed to hide from her father's gambling hands. 23 years of life had taught her little, except that men like her father and Silas Blackburn took what they wanted, and women like her mother, God rest her soul, paid the price. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by her father's bellowing voice. "Grace, you get back here, girl. You've got obligations, obligations." The word made her stomach turn. Her father had lost heavily to Blackburn in a poker game 2 nights ago, and rather than face the consequences of his debts, he'd offered up his only daughter as payment. Blackburn, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty that made hardened criminals shiver, had accepted with a smile that revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "I ain't asking again, Grace." Her father's voice was closer now, slurring slightly from the morning whiskey. Grace pressed deeper into the shadows of the tree line. Riversbend lay behind her, and before her stretched miles of wilderness. She had no plan beyond escape, no destination beyond a way. The late spring air carried the scent of wildflowers and pine, but all Grace could smell was fear. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats made her blood freeze. Had they found her already? But instead of her father's familiar bay gelding or Blackburn's massive black stallion, a dappled gray horse emerged from the tree line, ridden by a man she didn't recognize. He pulled his horse to a stop not 20 feet from her hiding place and dismounted in one fluid motion. Tall and lean, with a face weathered by sun and wind, he wore simple clothes, denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a worn leather vest. A cowboy's hat shadowed his features, but when he turned, Grace caught sight of clear blue eyes scanning the tree line. "I know you're there," he called, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "I ain't with them that's looking for you." Grace remained frozen, unconvinced. The stranger sighed and removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Name's Adam Vance. I work the Morrison Ranch north of here. Overheard Blackburn and your pa planning a search party at the saloon last night." He paused. "Also heard why." "How do I know you're not working for them?" Grace called from her hiding place, her voice steadier than she felt. Adam's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Fair question. Truth is, you don't. But I reckon if I wanted to drag you back to town, I wouldn't be standing here talking about it." He reached slowly into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. "I've got water if you're thirsty, and a proposition that might interest a lady looking to get far from Riversbend." Hunger and thirst won out over caution. Grace had fled before sunrise without breakfast, and her throat was parched. She stepped cautiously from behind the oak, still ready to bolt if necessary. Adam Vance didn't move as she emerged, just held out the canteen. "There's a stage leaving from Wilson's Creek tomorrow morning. Heads all the way to San Francisco, California. Far enough that men like Blackburn won't follow." Grace took the canteen, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." A shadow passed over Adam's face. "Let's just say I've seen what happens to women in your position before, and I've got no love for men like Blackburn." He paused. "Or men who'd sell their daughters to pay gambling debts." Grace took a long drink, considering his words. "Wilson's Creek is 30 miles west." "It is." "And you're offering to take me there." Adam nodded, replacing his hat. I am. Why should I trust you? She asked, though something in his steady gaze made her want to. You probably shouldn't, he replied frankly. But right now, I'm offering safe passage away from a wedding that'll be a death sentence of a different kind. Your other option is striking out alone through territory crawling with Blackburn's men, not to mention the usual dangers. As if to punctuate his point, another distant shout echoed from the direction of town. Grace flinched, then straightened her shoulders and made her decision. If you try anything, Mr. Vance, I'll cut your throat while you sleep. She patted the small knife concealed in her dress pocket. For the first time, Adam smiled fully, revealing a small dimple in his left cheek. Noted, Miss Winters. Now shall we go before your wedding party catches up? Within minutes, Grace was seated behind Adam on his horse, clutching her satchel with one hand and his belt with the other, trying to maintain as much distance between their bodies as possible while still staying on the horse. Hold tighter, Adam advised as he urged the horse into a canter. I promise I don't bite. Reluctantly, Grace wrapped her arm around his waist as they picked up speed, heading away from Riverspend and into the wilderness that stretched between her prison and freedom. The day passed in a blur of forest and open meadows. Adam kept them off the main trails, following game paths and streams that would be harder to track. He spoke little, asking only occasional questions about pursuit or if she needed to rest. Grace was grateful for the silence. Her mind was too full of fear and desperate hope to make conversation. By late afternoon, when the sun hung low in the western sky, Adam guided his horse into a small clearing beside a creek. We'll stop here for the night, he said, dismounting and offering a hand to help her down. Too risky to travel after dark in this terrain, and the horse needs rest. Grace ignored his hand and slid down on her own, wincing as her stiff legs hit the ground. Hours in the saddle had left her sore in places she'd never considered before. There's a spring-fed pool just through those trees, Adam said, nodding toward a thick stand of pines. Clean water if you want to wash up. I'll start a small fire and see about some food. Grace hesitated, eyeing the trees suspiciously. I'll stay right here, he added, seeming to read her concern. You'll be able to see the smoke from the fire the whole time. Grace nodded gratefully and made her way to the pool, glancing back several times to ensure Adam was keeping his word. The pool was small but crystal clear, fed by a trickling spring that emerged from a rocky outcropping. She knelt beside it, splashing the cool water on her face and neck, washing away the dust and fear of the day. As she dried her face on her sleeve, Grace caught her reflection in the still water. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her auburn hair had mostly escaped its pins, falling in tangled waves around her face. She looked wild, frightened but also alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. When she returned to the clearing, Adam had built a small, nearly smokeless fire and was roasting what looked like a rabbit on a makeshift spit. He glanced up at her approach but didn't comment on her disheveled appearance. Hope you're not opposed to rabbit, he said instead. Caught it while gathering firewood. Grace sat on a fallen log opposite him. I'm grateful for anything that isn't a wedding feast with Silas Blackburn. Adam's expression darkened at Blackburn's name. How'd your father come to owe him so much? My father would gamble away his own mother's soul if he thought it would bring him luck, Grace said bitterly. He's been losing to Blackburn for months, but 3 nights ago he lost everything: our house, what was left of the land, and when that wasn't enough. She trailed off, unable to finish. He offered you, Adam completed quietly. Grace nodded, staring into the fire. Not the first time he's tried to trade me to settle a debt, just the first time someone's accepted. She looked up suddenly, meeting Adam's gaze. Why does a ranch hand care about saving a stranger from a bad marriage? Adam was silent for a long moment, turning the rabbit to cook it evenly before answering. My sister Emily was 17 when our father died. We had a small spread outside of Kansas City. Not much, but it was ours. His voice grew distant with memory. Local land baron wanted our water rights. When Emily refused to sell after I went off to fight in the war, he found other ways to pressure her. Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. What happened to her? She married him, Adam said flatly. By the time I came back from the war, she was his wife. Told me she'd chosen it, but I could see the truth in her eyes. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. She died in childbirth a year later. Folks said it was just bad luck, but the midwife told me different. Said my sister looked like she'd given up long before the baby came. I'm sorry, Grace whispered. Adam nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without looking up. Swore then I'd never stand by while another woman was forced into something like that. He gestured to the rabbit. Food's ready. They ate in silence, the rabbit tender and flavorful despite the lack of seasoning. Afterward, Adam insisted Grace take his bedroll while he kept watch, promising to wake her for her turn later, though they both knew he had no intention of doing so. As Grace settled into the surprisingly comfortable bedroll, the day's exhaustion caught up with her. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Adam sitting against a tree, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness that surrounded their small haven of light. She dreamed of Silas Blackburn's hands around her throat, of her father counting coins while she screamed. She woke with a gasp just as dawn was breaking to find Adam already awake, saddling his horse. No sign of pursuit, he said without preamble, but we should keep moving. Still a good day's ride to Wilson's Creek, and that stage leaves at noon tomorrow. They traveled harder that day, Adam pushing them at a pace that had Grace's muscles screaming in protest. They stopped only briefly to rest the horse and eat a small meal of jerky and dried apples from Adam's saddlebags. By mid-afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley. Adam reined in his horse and pointed to a distant cluster of buildings shimmering in the heat. Wilson's Creek. We'll be there by nightfall. And tomorrow I'll be on that stage, Grace said, her voice carrying a mix of hope and uncertainty. Adam nodded, his expression unreadable as he urged the horse forward again. What will you do? Grace asked, suddenly realizing she'd given no thought to Adam's plans after delivering her to safety. Head back to the Morrison Ranch, I suppose, he replied. Work until winter sets in, then find somewhere to wait it out. Is that what you want? She pressed, finding it hard to imagine this man returning to an ordinary life as a ranch hand after what he'd shared about his past. Adam was silent for so long Grace thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, What I want doesn't matter much. It's what is. They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The landscape opened up as they descended into the valley, forest giving way to rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. They were perhaps 5 miles from Wilson's Creek when Adam suddenly pulled the horse to a stop, his posture alert. Riders, he said tersely, pointing to a dust cloud moving toward them from the west. Grace felt ice in her veins. Blackburn? Can't tell yet. Adam scanned their surroundings, then pointed to a dense stand of cottonwoods near the river. We'll take cover there until they pass. They reached the cottonwoods just as the riders came into view, 4 men moving at a steady pace along the main trail. From their hiding place, Grace could make out Silas Blackburn's massive form at the lead, his black stallion a stark contrast to the dusty trail. They're between us and Wilson's Creek, Adam whispered, his arm protectively in front of Grace as they crouched among the trees. "How did they get ahead of us?" Grace hissed, panic rising in her throat. "Must have guessed you were heading for the stage," Adam replied grimly. "It's the obvious escape route from Riversbend." Grace watched in horror as Blackburn and his men rode toward the small town. "They'll be waiting for me there." "Yes." Adam's mind was clearly working quickly. "But they don't know you're with me or that we're this close. They'll expect you to arrive alone, probably tomorrow morning just before the stage." "What does that matter? I can't go to Wilson's Creek now." Adam turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. "No, but I can." Before Grace could protest, he continued, "Listen carefully. There's a homestead about 3 miles east of here, old man Kerrigan's place. He's a cantankerous sort, but trustworthy. I'll take you there, make sure you're safe, then ride into Wilson's Creek alone." "And do what?" Grace demanded. "Book passage on that stage," Adam said, as if it were obvious. "Buy the tickets, then circle back for you before dawn. We'll approach from the east, avoiding the main road entirely. They'll be watching the North Trail from Riversbend, not the plains." Grace stared at him, torn between admiration for his quick thinking and fear at the risks involved. "And if they catch you, they won't," Adam said with quiet confidence. "To them, I'm just another cowboy passing through." As the dust from Blackburn's party faded in the distance, Adam led Grace eastward, staying within the cover of the trees along the riverbank. The sun was setting by the time they reached Kerrigan's homestead, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral nestled against a rocky hillside. The old man who emerged from the cabin at their approach was indeed cantankerous, greeting Adam's request for shelter with a stream of colorful language that made Grace's cheeks burn. But beneath the gruff exterior, there was a kindness in the weathered face that examined Grace's frightened expression. "Running from something, are you, girl?" Kerrigan asked bluntly. Grace lifted her chin. "Someone." The old man grunted. "Figured as much." "Well, I don't want no trouble, but I ain't one to turn away folks in need neither." He jerked his head toward the cabin. "Got stew on the stove. You can stay the night, but come morning you're on your way." "Thank you, sir," Grace said, relief washing over her. Adam declined to enter the cabin, insisting he needed to head for Wilson's Creek immediately to secure their tickets. As he prepared to leave, Grace followed him to where his horse was tethered. "Be careful," she said, suddenly afraid this might be the last time she saw him. Adam paused in checking his saddle. "Always am." "Why are you doing this, really?" Grace asked, the question that had been haunting her finally breaking free. "You've done more than enough to salve your conscience about your sister. You could leave me here and ride away clean." Adam looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing through his eyes. "Maybe I'm not looking to ride away clean." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse and was gone, a shadow disappearing into the gathering darkness. Inside Kerrigan's cabin, Grace found herself unable to eat much of the surprisingly delicious rabbit stew. Her stomach knotted with worry for Adam and fear of what tomorrow might bring. The old man didn't press her for conversation, seemingly content to smoke his pipe by the fire and leave her to her thoughts. He did, however, offer one piece of advice as he showed her to a small back room where she could sleep. "That cowboy of yours has steady eyes. My pa always said you can judge a man by his eyes more than his words." "He's not my cowboy," Grace replied automatically. Kerrigan just chuckled. "If you say so, girl, if you say so." Sleep eluded Grace that night. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every howl of a distant coyote had her sitting upright, certain it was Blackburn coming for her. When the first pale light of dawn crept through the small window, she was already dressed and waiting, her few possessions packed in her satchel. Kerrigan provided a simple breakfast of corn, bread, and coffee, watching with knowing eyes as Grace paced the small cabin. "He'll come back for you," the old man said matter-of-factly. Before Grace could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats sent her heart into her throat. She moved to the window, peering cautiously through the dirty glass. Relief flooded her when she recognized Adam's gray horse trotting toward the cabin. She was outside before he'd fully dismounted, questions tumbling from her lips. "Did anyone see you? Did you get the tickets? Are they still in town?" Adam held up a hand, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes despite the evident exhaustion on his face. "Yes, I got the tickets. Blackburn and 2 of his men are staying at the hotel opposite the stage office. The 3rd man is watching the North Road." "So we can't get through," Grace said, her brief hope collapsing. "Not from the north," Adam agreed. "But I did some asking around. The stage makes one stop about 5 miles outside of town at the Turner Ranch. If we can get there undetected, you can board when it stops." Kerrigan, who had followed Grace outside, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Turner Ranch is due south of here. You can cut across my east pasture, follow the creek bed. It'll take you right to their back 40 without ever hitting the main road." Adam nodded gratefully to the old man. "We need to move quickly. Stage leaves Wilson's Creek in less than 2 hours." After a hurried goodbye to Kerrigan, who waved away Grace's attempts to thank him, they were on their way again. Adam's horse picking its way carefully along the rocky creek bed that wound through the eastern edge of Kerrigan's property. "You didn't sleep," Grace observed as they rode, noting the dark circles under Adam's eyes. "Couldn't risk it," he replied. "Needed to keep an eye on Blackburn's men, see what they were planning." Grace felt a surge of gratitude mixed with something deeper, something she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this." Adam glanced back at her, his expression softening. "Live free, that'll be payment enough." The journey to the Turner Ranch took just under an hour. As they approached, they could see it was a substantial operation, with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. A woman was hanging laundry in the yard when they rode up, her eyes widening at the sight of them. "Mrs. Turner," Adam called, dismounting and helping Grace down. The woman nodded cautiously. "What can I do for you folks?" Adam quickly explained their situation, or a version of it, describing Grace as his sister fleeing an abusive husband. Mrs. Turner's face transformed from suspicion to sympathy as he spoke. "The stage should be here in about 45 minutes, she said when he'd finished. "You're welcome to wait in the house. My husband's in town on business, but he'd say the same." Inside the Turner home, Grace was offered a chance to freshen up before the journey. Mrs. Turner, a motherly woman with kind eyes, provided a clean dress that was only slightly too large and helped Grace tidy her hair. "Is he really your brother, Mrs.?" Turner asked as she pinned Grace's auburn locks into a simple but elegant style. Grace hesitated, then shook her head. Mrs. Turner smiled knowingly. "Thought not. Way he looks at you isn't brotherly at all." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks but didn't respond. Instead, she asked, "Have you been to San Francisco?" "Once, many years ago," Mrs. Turner replied. "It's a grand city, buildings tall as trees, streets busier than an anthill, and the bay. Oh, the bay is something to behold, especially at sunset." "Sounds wonderful," Grace murmured, trying to imagine such a place. "It can be hard, too," Mrs. Turner warned gently. "A woman alone will face challenges." "I'll manage," Grace said with more confidence than she felt. "I have to." When Grace emerged from the bedroom in her borrowed dress, she found Adam standing by the window, vigilantly watching the road. He turned at her entrance, and something in his expression made her breath catch. For a moment, neither spoke. you look." He began, then seemed to think better of it. "The stage should be here soon." Mrs. Turner glanced between them with a knowing smile. "I'll just check on that coffee," she said, disappearing into the kitchen with deliberate obviousness. Left alone, Grace moved to stand beside Adam at the window. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for helping me escape, but for treating me like a person worth saving." Adam's hand found hers, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You were always worth saving, Grace. I just happened to be the one who could do it." The distant rumble of wheels interrupted whatever Grace might have said in response. Adam's posture immediately tensed, his hand dropping from hers as he peered down the road. "It's the stage," he confirmed, relief evident in his voice. Mrs. Turner hurried back into the room. "Right on time. Now, I've packed some food for your journey, miss. It's a long ride to San Francisco." The stagecoach, a sturdy Concorde coach pulled by 6 horses, rolled to a stop in front of the Turner ranch. The driver, a weathered man with a magnificent mustache, called out a greeting to Mrs. Turner as he set the brake. Adam carried Grace's satchel to the coach, speaking briefly with the driver while Grace said her goodbyes to Mrs. Turner. When she approached the stage, Adam was waiting, an odd expression on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, suddenly afraid Blackburn had somehow found them. "Nothing's wrong," Adam said quickly. "But there's something I need to tell you before you go." Grace waited, her heart inexplicably racing. Adam took a deep breath. "I bought 2 tickets to San Francisco." Grace stared at him, uncomprehending. "2. If you'll have my company," he added, a vulnerability in his voice she hadn't heard before. "I thought perhaps you might feel safer not traveling alone. But your job at the Morrison Ranch, jobs come and go," Adam said with a slight shrug. "Some things are more important." Grace studied his face, reading the unspoken message in his eyes. "This isn't just about protecting me anymore, is it?" A smile touched the corner of Adam's mouth. "No, it's not." He held out the tickets. "It's your choice, Grace. You can take 1 ticket and go alone, start fresh without any complications. Or I can take both tickets," Grace finished for him, "and we can see where this journey leads together." "All aboard that's coming aboard," the driver called impatiently. Grace looked at the stage, then back at Adam's face, the face of a man who had risked everything to give her freedom, who had asked for nothing in return. In the span of 2 days, he had shown her more kindness and respect than any man in her 23 years. She reached out and took both tickets from his hand, her fingers lingering against his. "I think I'd like some company on this journey, Mr. Vance." The smile that broke across Adam's face was like sunrise after the longest night, full of promise and possibility. Together, they boarded the stage, settling side by side on the leather bench seat. As the coach lurched into motion, Grace looked back at the Turner Ranch growing smaller in the distance. Somewhere behind them was Riverspend, her father and Silas Blackburn all receding into a past she was leaving behind with every turn of the wheels. Adam's hand found hers again, warm and steady. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. Grace considered the question, surprised to discover the answer. "No," she said, the truth of it settling into her bones. "Not anymore." The journey to San Francisco was long and arduous. For 7 days, the stagecoach rattled and bounced along rutted roads and mountain passes, stopping at way stations for fresh horses and hasty meals. The coach was often crowded with other passengers, merchants, miners seeking fortune, families moving west, but Grace barely noticed the discomfort. Each night, when they stopped at coaching inns or way stations, Adam insisted on taking separate rooms or in the more rustic stops, ensuring proper distance between their bedrolls. His respect for her reputation and comfort only deepened Grace's growing feelings for him. They talked for hours during the quieter stretches of the journey, learning each other's stories. Adam told her of his years fighting in the war, of the nightmares that still woke him sometimes. Grace shared memories of her mother, a gentle woman who had taught her to read and write and dream of a better life than Riverspend could offer. By the time they crossed the California border, something had shifted between them, friendship deepening into something neither was ready to name, but both could feel, electric and inevitable as a gathering storm. On the seventh day, as the stage crested a final hill, the driver called back to his passengers. "San Francisco, folks. City by the bay." Grace pressed her face to the window, gasping at the vista spread before them. San Francisco sprawled across rolling hills, descending toward a vast blue bay where ships of all sizes dotted the water like white birds. The late afternoon sun gilded the city in golden light, making the windows of distant buildings flash like signals. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Adam leaned closer, his shoulder warm against hers as he looked out at their new beginning. "Worth the journey." Grace turned to him, their faces inches apart. "Every mile." The stagecoach deposited them at a busy depot near Portsmouth Square, in the heart of the boisterous city. After 7 days of travel, Grace's legs felt wobbly as she stepped down onto solid ground, taking in the overwhelming sights and sounds of San Francisco. People of all descriptions hurried past, gentlemen in fine suits, laborers in rough clothes, women in fashionable dresses, and others in practical work clothes. She heard snippets of languages she couldn't identify, smelled foods both familiar and exotic, and felt the cool breeze from the bay caress her face like a welcome. "What now?" she asked, suddenly aware they had no plan beyond reaching the city. Adam shouldered both their bags, looking around thoughtfully. "First, we find somewhere to stay, then we figure out the rest." Finding lodging proved more challenging than anticipated. Many hotels were full or priced well beyond their means. After several inquiries, they found a modest boarding house on a quiet side street run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who offered them separate rooms at a reasonable weekly rate. No visitors after 8 o'clock. The stern-faced but kind-eyed woman informed them as she showed them to their rooms. "And no shenanigans. I run a respectable establishment." "Yes, madam," Adam assured her, the picture of propriety despite the exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. That evening, after cleaning away the dust of travel, Grace and Adam met in the small dining room downstairs, where Mrs. Chen served a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. Several other boarders joined them at the large table, a schoolteacher, an elderly bookkeeper, and a young woman who worked at a nearby department store. The conversation flowed easily, with the other boarders curious about the newcomers. Adam smoothly explained they were recently arrived from Montana, looking to start fresh in San Francisco. "And are you married?" the schoolteacher asked, glancing between them with polite interest. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks, unsure how to respond, but Adam answered before the pause became awkward. "Not yet," he said simply, his eyes meeting Grace's across the table with a question in them. Later, as they sat in the small parlor with cups of tea, the house quiet around them as the other boarders retired for the night, Grace finally addressed what had been unspoken between them since leaving Wilson's Creek. "You said not yet," she began hesitantly. "At dinner, when asked if we were married." Adam set down his teacup, his expression serious. "I hope that wasn't presumptuous." "No," Grace said quickly. "It was hopeful." A smile touched his lips. "I am that." "Adam," Grace set aside her own tea, gathering her courage. "I need to know what happens now. You've brought me safely to San Francisco, fulfilled your promise. You don't owe me anything more." Adam leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. This was never about owing, Grace, not after that first day. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I came to San Francisco because I couldn't bear the thought of saying goodbye to you, but I don't want to be another man making decisions about your life." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I care for you," Adam replied simply. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. But after everything you've been through, the last thing you need is to feel obligated to someone else." Grace felt something tight in her chest begin to unravel. All her life, men had treated her as property her fathers to trade, Blackburns to possess. But here was Adam, offering her the one thing no man ever had, a choice. "What if I want you to stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not out of obligation, but because in just 7 days you've become the most important person in my world." Adam's eyes, so clear and blue, held her steadily. "Then I'll stay, for as long as you want me to." And if I said I wanted forever, the smile that spread across Adam's face was like sunrise, "I'd say that sounds about right." In the days that followed, they began building a life in San Francisco. Adam found work at the docks, his strength and quick mind earning him steady employment loading cargo. Grace, determined to support herself rather than rely on Adam's earnings, secured a position at a small dressmaker's shop, where her neat stitching and eye for detail quickly made her valuable. They settled into a routine, sharing breakfast at the boarding house before heading to their respective jobs, meeting in the evening to explore their new city together. On Sundays, they walked in Golden Gate Park or along the waterfront, watching ships come and go from distant ports, each carrying stories as varied as the people of San Francisco itself. 2 months after their arrival, on a clear Saturday afternoon, Adam took Grace on a picnic to a hillside overlooking the bay. The city spread below them, a jumble of buildings and streets teeming with life, while the vast Pacific stretched to the horizon, endless and full of possibility. "I have something for you," Adam said as they finished the simple meal of bread, cheese, and fruit. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Grace unwrapped it carefully to reveal a silver ring set with a small pearl. It wasn't fancy or expensive, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. "It's not much," Adam said, a touch of nervousness in his voice that she found endearing. "But it's honest, like what I feel for you." Grace looked up from the ring to his face, seeing there all the hope and love she felt mirrored in her own heart. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Grace Winters," Adam said, taking the ring and holding it poised at her finger. "I know we haven't known each other long in the counting of days, but my heart has recognized yours from the first moment. Will you marry me? Not because anyone is forcing you, but because you choose to." Tears blurred her vision as Grace nodded, unable to speak for the joy constricting her throat. Adam slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a gentle kiss, their first that held all the promise of the life stretching before them. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at a small church near the boarding house, with Mrs. Chen and several of their fellow boarders as witnesses. Grace wore a dress she had made herself, a pale blue creation that brought out the highlights in her auburn hair. Adam wore a new shirt and his best pants, his face solemn with joy as they spoke their vows. "I promise to love you freely and completely," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To support your dreams as my own, to walk beside you rather than ahead or behind, for all the days of my life." Grace, her heart so full she thought it might burst, responded with vows of her own. "I promise to choose you every day, to build our future together with courage and hope, to love you with all that I am, for as long as I live." After the ceremony, Mrs. Chen surprised them with a small celebration in the boarding house parlor, complete with a cake and a bottle of champagne someone had contributed. It was nothing like the grand wedding Grace's father had planned for her in Blackburn, with its forced festivities and undercurrent of dread. Instead, it was filled with genuine warmth and friendship, the beginning of a life chosen rather than imposed. That night, in the small room they would now share as husband and wife, Grace finally surrendered completely to the love she had been afraid to fully acknowledge. In Adam's gentle arms, she discovered that intimacy could be a joy rather than something to fear, a giving rather than a taking. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered in the quiet darkness afterward, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Never believed it was possible. Adam's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "You deserve every happiness, Grace Vance, and I intend to spend my life making sure you have it." The months passed, and their life together settled into a rhythm of work and love and discovery. With their combined savings, they were eventually able to rent a small cottage on the outskirts of the city, a place of their own with a tiny garden where Grace planted flowers and herbs. Adam's work at the docks led to a promotion to foreman, overseeing the loading and unloading of cargo ships from around the world. Grace continued at the dressmaker's shop, her skill earning her a reputation that brought in wealthy clients requesting her specifically. On the 1-year anniversary of their flight from Riverspend, Adam came home with a special surprise, a letter from Old Man Kerrigan, forwarded through several acquaintances until it reached them in San Francisco. "Figured you two might want to know," the letter read in Kerrigan's scrawling hand, "that Blackburn finally got what was coming to him. Shot dead in a dispute over a card game 3 months back. Your pa skipped town right after, Miss Grace. Folks say he headed east, running from his debts as usual. Don't reckon either of them will trouble you again." Grace read the letter twice, waiting for the relief or satisfaction she expected to feel at news of Blackburn's death. Instead, she felt only a quiet acceptance, as if a door had finally closed on a room she no longer needed to enter. "Are you all right?" Adam asked, watching her face carefully. Grace folded the letter and placed it on the table. "Yes," she said, realizing it was true. "They can't hurt me anymore. They never could once I found the courage to leave." She took Adam's hand, pressing it to her heart. "Once I found you." Adam pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the setting sun cast long shadows through their cottage windows. "You found yourself first, Grace. Your own strength. I just helped light the way." Grace smiled against his chest, knowing he was both right and wrong. She had found her strength, yes, but it was Adam's belief in her, his respect for her choices, that had shown her what love could truly be. That night, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Grace finally shared the news she'd been keeping close to her heart for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. "Adam," she whispered, guiding his hand to rest on her still flat stomach, "we're going to have a baby." The joy that transformed his face was something she knew she would remember until her dying day, pure, unguarded happiness that made him look suddenly younger, almost boyish in his wonder. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with awe. "Our baby." "Yes," Grace confirmed, laughing as he pressed reverent kisses to her stomach, then to her lips, then back to her stomach as if he couldn't decide where his joy should land first. "When?" "Dr. Miller says early winter. December, probably." Adam gathered her close, his hand still protectively cradling her middle. "I love you, Grace Vance. You and our child, more than I have words to tell you." "You don't need words," Grace replied, placing her hand over his. "I can feel it in everything you do." Their son, William Adam Vance, was born on a clear December morning in 1876, exactly 18 months after Grace had fled her wedding to Silas Blackburn. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair, a combination that made him the darling of their neighborhood. Life with a baby brought new challenges and deeper joys than either had anticipated. Adam proved to be a devoted father, as gentle and patient with William as he had always been with Grace. He would walk the floor with the colicky infant for hours, singing off-key cowboy songs that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. Grace watched them together and marveled at how far she had come from that frightened young woman hiding behind an oak tree, convinced her life was over before it had truly begun. 3 years after William's birth, their family grew again with the arrival of a daughter, Emily Rose, named for Adam's lost sister and Grace's mother. Emily was as spirited as her brother was contemplative, filling their small home with laughter and the patter of determined little feet. By then, Adam had partnered with 2 other former dock workers to start a small shipping company of their own, coordinating cargo transportation between San Francisco and the growing communities along the coast. The business prospered, allowing them to purchase a larger house in a pleasant neighborhood where both children would have good schools and safe streets to play on. Grace continued to sew, though now she worked from a sunny room in their home, creating wedding dresses and special occasion gowns for a select clientele. Her reputation had grown to the point where she could choose her projects, balancing her work with the demands of motherhood and the life she and Adam had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Adam surprised Grace with a weekend trip to a seaside in north of the city. With the children safely in the care of their trusted neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, they rode the train up the coast, watching the Pacific crash against rocky shores in timeless rhythm. The inn was perched on a cliff overlooking a protected cove, its windows capturing the boundless horizon where sea met sky. Their room was simple but beautiful, with fresh flowers on the dresser and a private balcony where they could sit and watch the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. After a dinner of fresh seafood and local wine, they walked along the beach, hand in hand under a sky scattered with stars. The sound of the waves and the cool sand beneath their feet reminded Grace of another journey along another shore, in another lifetime. "You ever think about it?" she asked as they paused to watch the moonlight shimmering on the water. "About how differently things might have turned out." Adam pulled her close against the evening chill. "Sometimes, I think about what might have happened if I hadn't overheard your father and Blackburn that night in the saloon. If I hadn't decided to help you." Grace leaned into his warmth, grateful beyond words for the life they had created together. "I was so afraid that day, hiding behind that oak tree, afraid of Blackburn, afraid of the wilderness, afraid of you." "And now?" Adam asked, his arms tightening around her. "Now I know that some fears are worth facing," Grace replied, turning in his embrace to look up at the face she had loved for a decade, the lines at his eyes and mouth only making him more dear to her. "Because sometimes, on the other side of fear is everything you never dared to hope for." Adam kissed her then, a kiss as full of promise as their first had been, yet deepened by years of shared joys and sorrows, challenges met and overcome together. When they parted, his eyes held the same steady light she had trusted that very first day. "Happy anniversary, my love," he whispered against her hair. "Happy anniversary," Grace replied, marveling still at the journey that had brought them here from a desperate escape to this moment of perfect contentment, from strangers to the deepest kind of family. Later that night, wrapped in Adam's arms in their room above the restless ocean, Grace reflected on the strange alchemy of chance and choice that shaped a life. A single decision to flee rather than submit, to trust rather than fear had altered everything. And in the years that followed, as their children grew and their life in San Francisco continued to flourish, Grace never forgot the lesson of that desperate gamble. That sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms, that love was found in the most unlikely places, and that the greatest journey of all was the one that led to home. By their 20th anniversary, Adam's shipping business had grown into a respected enterprise with offices in San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. They had moved once more to a handsome Victorian home on a tree-lined street, with enough room for their growing family and the frequent guests who gathered around their table. William, at 19, had inherited his father's steady nature and his mother's determination. He was studying engineering at university, fascinated by the new technologies transforming the world around them. Emily, 16 and headstrong, showed a remarkable talent for mathematics and had already declared her intention to become a teacher, despite the raised eyebrows such ambition sometimes caused in young women of her generation. Their youngest child, Thomas, born when Grace was 35, was now 7 years old, a surprise and joy who kept them young with his endless questions and boundless energy. He followed Adam everywhere, mimicking his father's walk and expressions in a way that made Grace's heart swell with tenderness. On a warm evening in the summer of 1896, as they sat on their wide front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Grace reached for Adam's hand, marveling at how familiar and yet precious his touch remained after all these years. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day when you found me hiding behind the oak tree?" she asked, her voice soft with memory. Adam's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, a gesture as automatic to him now as breathing. "I said a lot of things, most of them trying to convince you I wasn't going to drag you back to Blackburn." Grace smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You said you had a proposition that might interest a lady looking to get far from Riverspend. But you never imagined how far that journey would take us, did you?" Adam turned to look at her, his blue eyes still clear and direct despite the silver now threading through his once sandy hair. "I never dared hope for all of this," he admitted. "When I offered to help you escape, I thought I was just doing what was right. I didn't know I was finding my future." From inside the house came the sound of Thomas's laughter, followed by Emily's mock stern voice as she helped him with his reading. In the garden, William was explaining something about internal combustion engines to their neighbor's daughter, his hands gesturing enthusiastically as he spoke. Grace took in the scene: their home, their children, the life they had built brick by brick from the ruins of what might have been, and felt a completeness that still sometimes took her breath away. "I think about that scared young woman sometimes," she said thoughtfully. "The one who thought her life was over before it had begun. I wish I could tell her what was waiting, just beyond her fear." "What would you tell her?" Adam asked, his arms sliding around her shoulders. Grace considered the question, watching as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "I'd tell her that freedom isn't just about escaping something bad. It's about finding something good, something worth building a life around." Adam pressed a kiss to her temple, his beard now more silver than brown tickling her skin. "And did you find something worth building a life around?" Grace turned to face the man who had offered her safe passage to another life, and ended up becoming the cornerstone of that life instead. In his eyes, she still saw the cowboy who had risked everything for a stranger, who had given her choices when everyone else had only given demands. "I found everything," she whispered, her hand rising to cup his cheek. "And I choose it again, every single day." As twilight deepened around them and their children's voices filled the warm summer air, Grace Vance knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, once begun, never truly ended. They simply transformed, leading to destinations more beautiful than any map could chart, to a place that, no matter how far you traveled or how much you changed along the way, would always and forever be called home.